So in this video we're going to stick with the behaviourist approach, and this time we're going to look at operant conditioning. So just a quick recap on what we mean by the behaviourist approach. It suggests that we're born as blank slates and that everything we do is learned from the environment around us. So our experiences, the people around us are the things that make us behave in the way that we do. In the last video we looked at classical conditioning. In this one we're going to move on to operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is, at its most basic, it's learning from consequences. So something happens, you perform a behaviour, and then you get a positive or negative consequence as a result, and then you're more or less likely to perform that behaviour again. Now with classical conditioning we were looking at involuntary behaviours. With operant conditioning it's actually looking at voluntary behaviours, so things that we choose to do rather than things that happen automatically. Types of consequences then. So there are three types of consequences in operant conditioning that you need to know about. The first two are probably quite familiar to you. The third one is maybe slightly more complex. So the first one, positive reinforcement or a reward. So this is exactly what it says. You carry out a particular behaviour, and the example we're going to use is handing in homework on time. And as a result of that behaviour, something good happens. So a reward is given, an achievement point is given. And if that happens, then the behaviour, in this case handing homework in on time, is more likely to be repeated. The second consequence is a punishment. So a punishment is a negative consequence. Again, if we look at an example, a behaviour is carried out, but this time the homework is being handed in late. Now this is a non-desirable behaviour. So a punishment is given, and that might be a detention. Now because the detention is something unpleasant, then that behaviour is then less likely to be repeated. Now the third type of consequence is the one that people get confused about most, and that confusion generally arises because the word negative is in there. So if we look at an example, a behaviour is carried out. So again, this is a desirable behaviour. So similar to when we use positive reinforcement, homework is being handed in on time. This is something that we want to see. And as a result of that, a negative situation is taken away. So the example I've used is that parents say you're no longer grounded. Now in this situation, or how it differs from positive reinforcement, is that in positive reinforcement you start in a neutral situation and the reward or the positive reinforcement boosts you up. With negative reinforcement you start in a negative situation, so you're grounded. You can't go anywhere other than school until your homework is sorted. When the homework is sorted, then your parents take that negative situation away, which reinforces the behaviour that homework should be handed in on time. Now the reason why people get confused is because of this word here, negative reinforcement, and it seems at odds with the fact that something that says it's negative is going to make behaviour more likely to be repeated. But the important word to look at here is reinforcement. So reinforcement reinforces the behaviour, it makes it more likely to happen. So the key study that goes along with operant conditioning was carried out by Skinner, and he used a box similar to the one here you can see in the diagram, and he would put mice in the box, or rats in the box, and it's known as a Skinner box, it's named after him. And then one of three things would happen. So either if the rat pressed the lever, it would get a food pellet, and that would be acting as a reward, so it would continue to press the lever, so the behaviour was being encouraged. Or the second possible condition was if the rat pressed the lever, then it would receive an electric shock. So you can see that the floor is labelled with an electric grid. So it presses the lever and it gets an electric shock. That is obviously a punishment, it's unpleasant, and in that condition the rat was much less likely to press the lever again. It very quickly learned not to press it. In the third condition, the electric current was switched on anyway, and if the rat pressed the lever, then that electric current would be switched off. So the rat was in a negative situation, it was feeling this discomfort from the electric current, if it pressed the lever, that bad situation was taken away, so that was negative reinforcement. And Skinner did find in that situation that, again, the rat learnt to press the lever multiple times. So if we take this back to the schedules that we were looking at before, so in each case the behaviour carried out is exactly the same, it's pressing the lever. In the reward or the positive reinforcement condition, the reward was the food pellet being dispensed and the rat repeated the behaviour. In the punishment condition, it was the electric shock being given, that was the consequence, and the rat was less likely to press the lever. And in the negative reinforcement condition, the negative situation was taken away, so the electric shock actually stopped, and then the rat was more likely to repeat that behaviour. So schedules of reinforcement, there are various different types of reinforcement, and this comes in, this is thinking about when the consequence occurs after the action has taken place. So Skinner's work demonstrated continuous reinforcement, and that's the most simple schedule of reinforcement. An action is carried out and then immediately there is the consequence at the end of it. So that action is either reinforced or punished each time it's carried out. But there are other ways that behaviour can be reinforced. So other schedules, fixed interval reinforcement. So fixed interval reinforcement is when the consequence will happen at a fixed time, so for example every 10 minutes, provided the behaviour has been performed at some point within that 10 minutes. So the behaviour is performed, but it's not until the end of that 10 minutes that the consequence will occur. Variable interval reinforcement. Now this one is slightly more complex. It means that the reinforcement or the punishment will occur, say on average every 10 minutes, but not necessarily on the 10-minute mark. So it could be 2 minutes, or it could be 8 minutes, it could be 12 minutes. It will all average out as being every 10 minutes, provided the behaviour has occurred within the preceding time interval, but it's not on that 10-minute mark. 10 minutes is just an example, it could be any time period. Then we have fixed ratio reinforcement. So this is about the number of times that a behaviour is carried out. So for example, the reinforcement or the punishment will occur every time a behaviour is carried out 10 times. And after the 10th time, you get the consequence. And the last one is variable ratio reinforcement. So this is similar to variable interval reinforcement. A behaviour is carried out on average, a consequence is given on average, for example, every 10 behaviours, but it could be 2 behaviours, it could be 12 behaviours, it could be 20 behaviours. It will average out at being at the same point. This one is very, very resistant to extinction, and this is one of the reasons why gambling is so addictive, because gambling uses variable ratio reinforcement. So, things you need to know before coming into the lesson, or things you need to be confident with. Make sure that you can write an explanation of operant conditioning in your own words. So you do need to use the key terms, but as we did with classical conditioning, try and make sure you can do it without using an example. Secondly, outlining Skinner's study. So again, aim, method, results and conclusion. And thirdly, make sure you can explain the different schedules of reinforcement. Again, you can go back and watch this video as many times as you like, or you can go and look at the pre-reading, and that will take everything into a little bit more depth.